How many of you people have got a wooden leg? Anyone here have a wooden leg? I mean, wooden leg. Are you sure you don't have a wooden leg? I've often referred to a book by Eric Byrne called Games People Play, and I think it was very popular some time back, and probably most of you have heard of the book as well. In this book, he describes a number of different games, pastimes, and what have you that people are fond of playing. They follow very, very similar little formats. One of the games that I think know a lot of people like to play is a game called Ain't It Awful? You know, well, boy, the price of living's gotten awful high. Yeah, ain't it awful? And we'll go back and forth about all the things that are awful. This is awful and that's awful. And people seem to enjoy playing that. Parents get together and play a game called PTA, where we all discuss the school and the problems at the school and problems our kids are having and what's wrong with the teachers. A lot of married couples play, and a lot of other people for that matter, a game called Why Don't You, Yes But. In this one, a person comes along with a problem, and you just listen to the problem beautifully, and you play a little game called I Was Only Trying to Help. So what you do is you try to help. And you say, well, why don't you try this? Well, yes, but if I did that, this other bad thing would happen. Oh, well, then in that case, try this. Well, yes, but if I did that, well, if it wouldn't work because of another reason. Well, why don't you then do so-and-so? And this can go on for quite a while. And the whole idea is to get the person who is saying, why don't you, to give up. If they gives up, you've won the game. I bet a lot of you have been involved in that little game once in a while in your life. Along with some of the others. Well, one of the games that I found rather fascinating is a game called Wooden Leg. Now, there's nothing very complicated about the game of Wooden Leg. It involves using a handicap, real or imagined. Now, this handicap doesn't necessarily have to be a real handicap. It could be just something in your head, real or imagined, as an excuse for not producing. And the operative phrase, the thing that you use to illustrate it is, what do you expect from a person with a wooden leg? I mean, I can't do this. I got a wooden leg. This is the simple little thesis of the game of wooden leg. Now, what sort of handicap would we be talking about in playing wooden leg? Well, it can be anything that keeps you from being productive. It could be an illness. It could be an infirmity. It could be one of those things. But on the other hand, it could also be fear, something you're afraid of. It could be anger. It could be bitterness. You could carry around a real load of bitterness towards somebody or something or some situation, and you could carry that and nurse it and spend time with it and work with it. And all the time that you are nursing that root of bitterness, you're not producing anything. You're not doing anything. Anxiety. Relatives. Children. Oh, boy, you talk about a wooden leg. Children are a ready-made excuse for mothers not doing certain things that they really possibly have all said, well, I always wanted to do it, but I just never could because of the children. Wooden leg. Simple. Well, I always wanted to do it, but I had to take care of my mother. Wooden leg. Whatever it is that you use as an excuse for not being productive, that's your wooden leg. Could be your boss. But the funny thing about that is, it can also be the fact that you don't have a job. In other words, one person will have his boss as his wooden leg, the other person will have no job as a wooden leg, and there are a lot of these little situations that cause trouble. For example, it's my husband, or it's the fact that I don't have a husband. It's my wife, or it's the fact, well, if I just had a wife, I wouldn't have this problem. I'd be able to, boy, it'd be wonderful if I did, and that's my reason. Somebody else saying, well, if I didn't have a wife, I could do so much more. It could be wife, no wife. It could be being married or being divorced. A lot of people use their divorce as a wooden leg. And there was one fellow who came over to sell me storm windows one day at my house, knocked on the door to door. So I'm like, how about some storm windows? And he never sold me any storm windows because we're talking 2-3 minutes, and all of a sudden he's telling me about his divorce and all the problems with his wife. And of course, he then goes round and round with his divorce. And when he gets to the end of the month and he hasn't sold anything, well, the divorce is just really bearing down on me, and I just can't really get my head into my sales. His divorce is his wooden leg. Guilt can be a wooden leg. Age can be a wooden leg. You can be too old, or you can be too young. And you can't do it because you're too old, or you can't do it because you're too young. It may be lack of education or lack of training that keeps you from doing it. It may be location. Boy, well, if I just wasn't living down here in the south, if I was up there in the north, I could sell those snowmobiles a whole lot better than I could down here. It may be the fact that you're in love. Oh, yeah, being in love is an excuse for all kinds of things that you don't do that you really ought to do. Well, I'll get around to it later, but right now I'm in love. Actually, we make excuses for one another more on that. Well, he'll be all right. He's just in love, or she is. It may be the fact that we're not loved, though. That's the other side of it. You can use either love or you can use the fact that you're not loved. Either one of them could be a wooden leg, an excuse for not doing something, for not being productive. Inability can be a real dandy one. In other words, I can't do it. I don't know how to do it. But of course, we all know a person can learn how to do things, but I can't. Anything, even revenge, can become a wooden leg because you get so wrapped up in getting revenge or getting back at somebody that you're not producing. Now, I could go on and on with a list. Now, how many of you have got a wooden leg? Well, put it that way, it gets a little bit different now. We're getting down to something that might help us to understand something. Is this important? Turn back, if you would, to your Bible, the first chapter of Genesis, verse 1. Because this little game is hurting us, hurting you, hurting me, in ways that I think we have never really realized. In Genesis chapter 1 and verse 26, and God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and the fowl of the air and over the cattle, over all the earth, over every creeping thing that creeps. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he them." Now let me ask you something. What is, in your mind, the most dominant characteristic of God? Now, an awful lot of people will say love and long-suffering or patience or endurance. But one of the most common expressions of addressing God is God, our Creator. Now, of course, at this stage of history, how is God best known? Well, we haven't had a chance to learn anything about mercy or love or long-suffering or endurance. The thing that we know most about God when this statement is made is that he is a creator. Now let me ask you, if we are created in the image of God, and one of the most dominant characteristics of God is that he is a creator, then should not man in God's image be a creating, a creative being, a creator of sorts himself? Well, sure. It's very obvious that that would be the case. Now, the biblical imagery, the images, the little metaphors, the analogies the Bible tends to offer to us are almost inevitably agricultural in nature. You won't find the expression, be productive. You'll find something a little bit more agricultural. It will tell you, be fruitful. For example, right here it goes on to say, God blessed them and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it. Now, we all know that involves being fruitful in the sense of children, but the expression really could just as easily be translated, be productive. And he put them in a garden and said, get to work on this, dress it, keep it, improve it, don't just let it go wild. He actually gave them something creative to do from day one. Now, you will find all sorts of little interesting expressions as you go along. Be fruitful, bring forth fruit, bear fruit. Jesus used these expressions. And basically what it means is be productive. Produce something. Create something. This is one of the things that God expects of man. I want you to turn back to just a couple of places in the teachings of Christ to see how he used this sort of statement or analogy to try to get across to us the fact that we are creative beings and we are supposed to be creative beings. Luke the 13th chapter and verse 6. He spoke also this parable. A certain man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard, and he came and he sought fruit thereon and found none. And he said to the dresser of his vineyard, behold, these 3 years I come seeking fruit on this fig tree, and I don't find any. Cut it down. Why is it cumbering the ground? And he answered, said, let it alone. This year also shall I dig about it and dung it. If it bear fruit, well. And if not, after that you shall cut it down. And he goes on and says he was teaching in the synagogue. Well, what's this all about? Is this some sort of a lesson for the farmer? that we're supposed to go out and cut a tree down, and after we've digged about it and done it, if it's not bearing fruit, cut it down? Well, I suppose so. But Jesus basically was addressing his parables and his teachings to human beings. And we're supposed to grasp certain things from this. And it says, and of course, obviously, Jesus is the landlord or the owner in this parable. For it was Jesus who came up to a fig tree and looked around on it, expecting to find fruit, found none, and cursed it because it had produced nothing. And they came back and found it withered. And the lesson was for his disciples, not for the farmers. The lesson in this parable is for Jesus' disciples, not for the farmers. The lesson is clear, that Jesus would come to us and expect to find that we had produced something, that we had borne fruit. He comes and he doesn't find it. He says, all right, we've got to prune the tree, we've got to dig around the roots, we've got to fertilize this tree, and we're going to do this for a period of time, and if it still doesn't produce, well, we're going to have to cut it down. Now, that's a rather sobering analogy to think about. And yet, it's very important to realize that if we ever, without realizing what we're doing, we play this little game called wooden leg, and we start using excuses or, infirmities or problems or difficulties that we have as excuses for not being productive. I'm not going to get too deep into produce what today. That's something we can think about a lot over whatever period of time we like. But something that if we don't produce something, that we are at risk, aren't we, based upon what we read in this particular parable? John the 15th chapter is in some ways more to the point, but you might find it worth your time to go back and read illustrations in your Bible about yielding fruit and producing and bearing fruit. John the 15th chapter. I am the true vine, and my Father is the husbandman. Every branch in me that doesn't produce, he takes away. Every branch that produces, he purges it that it may bring forth more fruit or produce more. Now you are clean through the word that I have spoken to you. Abide in me, and I in you, as the branch cannot produce of itself. No more can you unless you remain in me. I am the vine. You are the branches. He that remains in me, and I in him, the same produces much. For without me, you can do nothing. If a man remain not in me, he is cast forth like a branch and is withered, and then cast him into the fire and they are burned. And you'll find illustrations repeatedly that show that God expects productivity from us as children. Now, we can talk about bearing fruit in the sense of conversions in the church and people and this type of thing. But really, what Jesus is saying here is not very specific, and deliberately so. He's not trying to get down to brass tacks about what it is that you produce. He wants you to produce something along the way. Now, we all know, thanks to a lot of psychological research that's been done, some of it we knew ourselves without anybody telling us, that human beings have a hierarchy of needs. And by this they mean that there are certain things you need more than others. And lots of times you can really set this up fairly neatly based upon the length of time you can do without something. For example, can you do without water longer than you can do without air? Well, yeah, you can. You can't go without air anywhere near as long as you can go without water. So you would say that in a hierarchy of needs, you need air more than you need water. Now, you have to have both to survive, but the immediacy of this hierarchy is air first, then water. You've got to breathe, or that water isn't going to do you any good at all. Somewhere beneath that comes food. And, of course, I think a man named Maslow, I forget which it is, they went to Maslow, did a complete layout, really, of the hierarchy of needs of human beings and how these things actually structure. And we know that man needs love. We know that man needs sex. In fact, somebody somewhere back down there coined the expression sex drive. In other words, that there is something down inside of a man that drives him in the direction of sex. But, of course, it's not nearly as strong as a man's drive for air or a man's drive for water. And if he is done without food long enough, his, quote, sex drive, end quote, is not going to be there. He's just not going to care about it. He's going to be consumed with the desire to have food. So these things all lay out. What I feel is sometimes unrecognized in human beings is the drive to create. I believe that in man from the very beginning, right from the very word go, from day one, that man was created to create. And when a human being, when a man, a woman, a person is not producing, the human being, the human machine, the human in all of these things doesn't work right. Things start working wrong. Things start breaking down. Now, what things? Do I mean health? I don't know, possibly. But the truth to tell that if there is a need, if there is something that was created in us, a certain thing that is not being fulfilled, then psychologically, and perhaps eventually physiologically, human beings aren't going to work right. There's an interesting theory that involves around the different talents and abilities that a human being has. I forget, there was an organization down in Houston some time back that was doing a broad spectrum of tests of human ability. And they would test your finger dexterity, manual dexterity. They would test certain intellectual capacities. They test your vocabulary. And they would create a spectrum of different abilities and strengths, and they would rate you on these things. And their theory, Frank, was that if you had these strengths and these abilities, and you were not in any way using some of your strongest things, you were bound to be dissatisfied and unhappy in your work or your home or in some aspect of your life. If you had to find some way that your talent, your ability, what you had, could actually find an outlet, could be productive, could do something worthwhile, or else you were just not going to be fulfilled as a human being, as a person. I really don't know what they learned over the years and whether that is still in vogue or whether it's still being practiced as a testing and vocational guidance method or not, but it makes a certain amount of sense, regardless of the accuracy of their testing methods. The fact that if a human being has certain needs, and if the ability to create or the freedom to produce actually is one of those, then there is going to be problems along the way. I am convinced personally that a great deal of our personal problems, our frustration, our aggravation, our illness, our fears, and our anxieties arise because of a failure to meet a fundamental need that all human beings have. That is, to create, to produce something, almost anything. When that is blocked by external forces, or when it is blocked by a wooden leg of our own making, we cannot be happy. There's some interesting things, I think, that have been seen on that over the years. I think it has some profound implications for prison life, as a matter of fact. I saw a fascinating little story on television some nights back when this old fellow, kind of obviously not a very well-educated man, he'd been in prison for quite a long time, and while he was in prison, for want of anything else to do, he began to build matchstick houses. I don't know where he got his matches, because in prison that's something they don't necessarily let you have that many of. But he would collect matches. I guess either burnt ones or whole ones or what have you. And he, while he was in prison, in order to have something to do, began to build little matchstick houses. Now, it might not have been much, but after all, a poor fellow in prison didn't have the education. He was blocked by the bars from going out and building a real house. So this urge to create, this urge to build inside of him found outlet in building matchstick houses. Now he's out of prison. Right now he's on the project trying to build one that'll make the Guinness World Book of Records. Probably will do so, because not that many people are going to try to beat his record of building matchstick houses. But that was his thing. He had to find a way of doing that. If I were the devil, and my goal were to defeat or to disrupt God's plan, would I rather cause you to sin, or would I rather maneuver you into doing nothing at all? Think about that. Which would be better for me if I was the devil? To sort of jockey you into position and trap you into a situation where I can maneuver you into committing a sin, which that cuts you off from God. That's a sin. That caused the death of Christ and all these things. Or would I be more inclined to want to maneuver you into a position where I could get you so anxious or so bound up by a problem or so afraid that I had you to where you would sit in a chair for hours on end and stare out the window and worry and do nothing? Which of these, from the devil's perspective, do you suppose, would be more productive? Well, the problem with the first one of these is that if I maneuver you in a position of sin, you're liable to start feeling guilty. And if you start feeling guilty and you get kind of convicted of your sin, you're liable to be sorry you did it. And if you're sorry you did it, that sorrow can lead you along the road to where you finally are repentant. And if you repent, repentance can lead to justification. And justification can lead to salvation. And the whole thing could be defeated by the fact that I got you to commit sin, which caused you to feel guilty, which caused you to repent. On the other hand, it seems like it would be far safer to make you afraid to do anything. Now, turn back, if you would, to the 25th chapter of Matthew, to a familiar parable, but one that I'm afraid people oftentimes overlook, one of the fundamental things in this parable. This is the parable of the talents. In verse 14 we read, "For the kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling into a far country, who called his own servants and delivered them his goods, and to one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to every man according to his several ability, and he immediately took his journey. And he that had received the 5 talents went and traded with them, and made them 5 other talents." Now this man had 5, took those 5, put them to work, and produced something. Now talents, of course, were a unit of money back in these days. A silver talent was a specific weight of silver that could be used to buy and sell things. So that's the analogy that's used. It is interesting the word talent is used because it lends itself into the use of your own personal talents and abilities. But in any case, he actually produced something, almost as though it were out of thin air. I've often thought, because we've been building our own home recently, or having a builder build it for us, what a satisfying occupation building must be. For, you go by and you look at an empty lot, and there's just nothing there. And then you go to work, and you put people to work, and you collect people, you contract with people, you use the labor of people, you pay them for their labor, but when you pull it all together, and you come back about 3 months later, or in the case of my home, 8 months later, and here sits brick and mortar and 2x4s and all this put together, all of it's all nicely painted, and you've got carpet on the floors, and there was nothing there. Nothing there before. And you, because of what you have done, have pulled all these people together, and you have built this thing. What a tremendous thing that is to see that happen. There was nothing here until we conceived, and we went ahead, and we wanted to do this thing. It must be tremendously satisfying to even be the people who go in there and nail those boards together and put that with their own hands together and make something where there was nothing before. Well, this man took his 5 talents and went out and worked with them and produced 5 talents where there had not been talents before. Not bad. The man that had received 2 talents gained 2 more. But he that had received 1 went and digged in the earth and hid his Lord's money. After a long time, now again, no productivity. No productivity. He did nothing. After a long time, the Lord of those servants comes and reckons with them. And he that had received 5 talents came and brought other 5 talents, saying, Lord, you delivered me 5 talents, I have gained besides them 5 more. His Lord said, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a few things, I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. Notice what he considers faithful. He considers faithful the fact that the man produced. That where there was not something before, now there was something. Where there were 5 before, now there are 10. Pretty important. He that received 2 came with the same story. His Lord said, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. Creating, producing, increasing is what faithfulness is. Not merely holding on to what you've got. Sitting still. Then he which had received the 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew you that you were a hard man, reaping where you have not sown, gathering where you have not strawn, and I was afraid. Fascinating. He was motivated by fear. He was scared. And so he went and hid the talent in the earth, and lo, you have what is yours. His Lord answered, you wicked and slothful servant. You knew that I reap where I didn't sow. You know that I gather where I have not strawed. You ought to have put my money to the exchanger. Then at my coming, I could have at least received my own with usury. Take therefore the talent from him, and give it to him which has 10 talents. For to every one that has shall be given, and he shall have abundance, and from him that has not shall be taken away even what he has. Cast you the unprofitable servant into outer darkness. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. What sin did the man commit? Would he have been worse off if he had lost the talent? How could he have been worse off? He could have given it away. He could have handed it to the poor people. He could have spent it on wine, women, and song. He couldn't have been any worse off. He hid it in the earth. He didn't steal it. He gave back to him what he'd given to him. He had done nothing good with what he had been given. The difference that I see in the men who were blessed and the man who was not is that they produced something, and he didn't. So I would have to say, if I were the devil, I would probably feel that I would accomplish more by getting people to freeze up, by causing them to sit and do nothing, than I would necessarily by getting them to actually commit a sin. Because sin, getting them to commit sin is risky business from the devil's point of view, because that could wind up leading them to repentance and to salvation. The man said, I was afraid. But aren't we supposed to fear God? Yeah, of course we are. I began to thought about that. You know, there is a true fear of God, and I believe that there is also a counterfeit fear of God. And one of the things that I think is different about this is that the legitimate fear of God, you can feel and experience and be happy at the same time. In other words, the legitimate fear of God, which is really a respect that is awesome, that you are so awestruck by God that you fear to disobey Him, but that fear of God that the Bible says is clean and healthy and wholesome. You can experience it and feel it and be happy at the same time you're experiencing the fear. The counterfeit fear makes you miserable. You are unhappy when you are experiencing that kind of fear, and that can be a fear of God. Oh, sure. It cannot be, not that you're afraid of what somebody's going to do to you, not that you're afraid, of more of your boss than you are of God. It's that you're afraid of God, and that fear is making you miserable. That's not the legitimate fear of God that a human being is supposed to feel. 1 John, the 4th chapter, makes a fascinating statement in this regard. 1 John, I'm going the wrong way. 1 John chapter 4, and verse 18. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. Fear has torment. Oh, you bet it does. If you're afraid, especially if you've done something and you're afraid that God's going to get you for it, I mean, you can be sweating bullets in the middle of the night and go for days on end without even being able to digest your food. It can really wear you down. Fear has torment. He that fears is not made perfect in love. That fear that torments you, that's not the fear of God that is clean. Because the fear of God that is clean leads you to repentance, not to be repented of. Leads you to a renewing of the relationship with God. Now, if you want to read some interesting illustrations of this, you can make your way through the Psalm. Because there are times when David begins the Psalm afraid and ends the Psalm with absolute confidence. This is the kind of going to God, I have been wrong. I have made some terrible mistakes. The arrows of my enemies are sticking out of me all over because of what has happened. But then he works his way through the prayer and comes out the other side with absolute confidence in God, knowing that he's going to be delivered, feeling strong, feeling very bold, as a matter of fact, to go out and face what he has to do. This is the clean fear of God that leads you to turn around. It is that counterfeit fear that the devil likes to teach us. As it puts it in one place in the Bible, your fear of me is taught by the precept of men. That torments people in that kind of a situation. What is the key element? I think true fear makes you productive. It causes you to do something. The counterfeit fear makes you unproductive. It tends to freeze you, to immobilize you. One of the key elements, frankly, in this counterfeit fear, if I may call it that, is its concern about what might happen to you. It's essentially selfish. It may be about what happens to you or your husband or your children, but even that is your empirical self. It's that broader self, and it's still basically a concern about yourself. Let me ask you something. How often in your lifetime have your fears proven justified? Now, frankly, if everything that you had been afraid of in your lifetime had come to pass, well, where would you be today? Some of us would either be dead and buried in our caskets, or we'd be in an insane asylum somewhere locked up, or not healthy and happy and enjoying the lives like we are today. most of the things that you're afraid of at one time or anxious about or sweat over or worry about, most of those things never come to fruition, do they? A fraction of them do, but most of them do not. But if you suffer the torment of fear on every one of those things, then what you fear will never have to come about because you suffered it anyway. In other words, we go ahead and we suffer all of the torment of fear, suffer all of the emotions, all of the suffering, all of the anxiety that we would actually go through if it really happened to us, and it never did. It's a funny thing, and I wonder to myself, why do we do that? Why do we allow that to happen? Next question is, what do you do about fear, when you understand these things? Now, that question is pregnant with meaning because it really goes right to the heart of the question. For the fact is that most of us do nothing about fear except suffer it. Some more. It's always good for somebody, you always have your friends at times like that, pat you on the back and say, don't worry about a thing, everything will be all right. Boy, that's easy for you to say. And so we go. We go right ahead and suffer it. Truth to tell, is what we really need at a time like that is to get off our backside and do something. Almost anything, as a matter of fact. Almost anything. Back a few pages here in 1 John, in verse 15, or verse 16. Hereby perceive we the love of God, because he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for the brethren. Whoever has this world's good, and sees his brother has need, and shuts up his bowels of compassion from him, how dwells the love of God in him? Now remember, just a little later we said love, or earlier we said love casts out fear. It's a little later in John's letter. Love casts out fear. He that fears is not made perfect in love. But whoever has this world's good and sees his brother in need and shuts up his bowels of compassion from him, how does the love of God dwell in him? What does this say to you? Does this give you an idea that if you're having problems of your own, suffering from anxiety, or maybe whatever your wooden leg happens to be, that it might be useful for you to get your mind off yourself for a while and do something for someone else? Because this is where love begins to be expressed, my little children. Let us not love in word, neither in tongue, but in deed and truth. Oh, I see. So much of the time when we say, love casts out fear, I need to love more. And this becomes something we do from our armchair, along with, we sit in our armchair and we sit there and we try to fight worry with love. Funny. It doesn't work. It really never quite gets around to doing anything. Whereas this says, little children, let us not love in word, neither in tongue, but in deed and truth. Okay, that means get up out of the armchair, go find someone who needs help, and help that person. That's how we love people. For if our heart condemn us, what in the world does that have to do with what went before? It has to do with the problem, the struggle that we do with worry, anxiety, fear, and a particular heart condemning us is guilt. If you're sitting around feeling guilty, let's understand God is greater than your heart. I mean, God's not petty. This is one of the difficulties that you and I have from time to time. When our fear of God becomes overwhelming and we're instead of being in love or being happy in the fear of God and turning our life around and beginning to overcome, we are paralyzed by fear of what God is going to do to us because of what we have done. What we need to understand is that when your heart is condemning you, God is not petty like your heart and my heart is. He is greater than that. And God's not going around looking for reasons to hurt you or to hurt me. Has no interest in it. It's not anything he cares to spend one moment of his day doing. All he wants to do is to help you get your life straightened out. Now, if that involves causing you a little bit of temporary pain, he's willing to do that. But we should have confidence that in a period of time where that temporary pain is being suffered, it's not pointless. It's not meaningless. It is for a purpose. It's to help us to get out of our problem. If our heart condemn us, God is greater than our heart and knows all things, and you don't have to worry about a petty God who is going to somehow hurt you along the way. Fearfulness, anxiety, can be a health problem. It's one thing I think that some of us need to realize sometimes. It can be a vitamin deficiency. It can be an imbalance in the endocrine system. It can be low blood sugar, which a lot of us have heard a lot about in recent years. It can be a drug dependency, which I know one gentleman now is really fighting his way through a terrible stage of anxiety because he's trying to overcome drug dependency that went back to his teenage years. And really a very tragic situation. But I do believe he's going to win his way right out of it. I think that a lot of us who may suffer from chronic anxiety might need to go seek professional help. We'll get a physical examination, have somebody go check us over, and at least go away from there feeling a little bit better when the doctor says, no, can't find a thing wrong, you seem to be in good health to me. But more often, frankly, fearfulness is an attitude problem, not a health problem. I think sometimes it becomes a health problem because of the fear. More often it's an attitude problem. It involves your own decision, or more often your own indecision. It may be guilt-induced, and it may be your wooden leg. That's the thing which I think we really got to think long and hard about, because it's a peculiar thing that we have as human beings. We will have something that we're worrying about. It's something that we are anxious about. And we'll work on it for a long period of time, and we'll sort it out to a certain point in our mind. We'll get it all neatly packaged up and put a bow in it. I see, that's not going to be a problem, and we'll put it up on the shelf, and we'll start off down the road to get something done. First thing you know, it has unwrapped itself, it has untied the bow all by itself, whipped open the package, and it's right back there in our mind, and we're working on it again. This worry, whatever it may be. And so we go work our way through it again. And you get to the place, I don't know if you've experienced this, maybe you haven't really asked yourself this question. Why do I keep resurrecting this thing that I am worried about instead of putting it to bed? Why can't I leave it alone? Sort of like a sore tooth, If you're going along and all of a sudden it's not hurting, you wonder if it would hurt if I suck on it. It's not going to be very long before you're going to find out. You can't stand it. Got to know if it's still sore down there. So you suck. And it does hurt. Yeah, it's still there. Why do we do that? Why is it that we won't let things like that alone? I don't know, and I'm not, knowledgeable enough to psychoanalyze myself, much less you. But I still have to ask: are we using that sort of thing as a wooden leg? Is that the reason we don't let go of it? It's because somehow or other it gives us something to do rather than produce, to create, to accomplish. I think we need to learn that when we're in that kind of a cycle in our life, now it may be over fear, it may be over resentment, it may be bitterness, it could be anger, it could be revenge, it could even be a real health problem as far as that's concerned. But something that's pulling you down and is keeping you from being productive. You need to break loose and do something. Create something. Produce something. Even a hobby is better than nothing. Even a poor old fellow doing the best he can in prison of collecting matches from his fellow prisoners once they've lit the cigarette, of being able to put it all together and over painstaking over a period of time, build himself a little house of matchsticks is just a whole lot better than sitting back in the dark corner of his cell and brooding about society and why he's there and how it's unfair and I don't deserve this. When I get out, I'm going to show somebody. Just a whole lot better. Frankly, I think a lot of times when we think about hobbies, we think about pastimes rather than something creative. I don't know how many of you have a hobby. I don't know what you do. But sometimes it's nothing more than, just to analyze your little hobby or the things that you do. Are they creative? Are they productive? Are they constructive? Or is it just something to keep you occupied while the time goes by? Now, there's nothing wrong with a pastime that relaxes you, gets your mind off some of the things that you're doing, and breaks down for a period of time. But whenever we do that for any prolonged period of time, there is an itch inside of you that's not being scratched. There is a human need that is not being fulfilled. That man was created to build and to be a builder, and when man is doing nothing but idling, he is not going to be happy. Now, it isn't that God's going to come along and say, "Fuck, you haven't done anything, I'm going to get you." He doesn't have to do anything. You are doing it to yourself every day of your life where you just simply watch the clock tick and allow your life to go by without producing something, even a hobby? Are you one of these people that have always wanted to paint, but have never done it? Now, by paint, I don't mean, the walls. I mean a landscape, a picture, a portrait, a still life. Are you one of these people that have said, boy, I would like to be able to paint? Who's holding you back? Where are the handcuffs? Who has prevented you from doing this? Maybe your wooden leg has kept you busy to where you can't actually go out and actually have a go at it. But really, what's stopping you? Do it. Somebody says, well, I can't. How do you know you can't? Tell me something. Do you think that most people who paint go down to the store, buy themselves some brushes and paints and tubes of paint and so forth, and some canvas, and go out and paint, the first time and do something worthwhile with it? Are you under that impression? Most people don't. Most people who learn how to paint, I said it already, didn't I? I gave it away. They learn how to paint. I used to say, boy, I'd like to be able to paint, but I can't draw. I can't draw anything. I can't draw a straight line with a ruler. Well, that's a lie, because I can draw a straight line with a ruler. But it is true for me to say I cannot draw. And that makes it difficult for you if you can't paint. If you're trying to paint, you can't draw. But why can't I? Is it because I am inherently unable? No. Is it because I have no talent? I have really no idea. Now, they give these little talent contests. Draw this. You send it in and say, you've got lots of talent. Let me study you this art course. But the truth is, you're not going to know whether you really have talent until you sit down and somebody begins to explain certain things to you about perspective and show you the tricks, show you how it's done, like those ministers in the rowboat, a couple of them got out and walked on the water, and the other guy felt real inferior. They urged him to try it, and he sank. Twice he sank. But finally they said, well, shall we show him where the rocks are? You need somebody to show you where the rocks are, that's all. The little tricks of the trade, the little shortcuts along the way. You need somebody to show you how to blend your paints for colors. Somebody needs to show you explain to you what linseed oil is and what it does in relation to paints. There's just a whole lot of things to learn. And it can just be a whole lot of fun to you. And if you've always wanted to do it, do it. Why sit around and wish that you could do it when all you got to do is do it? Now, you may need some lessons. So really, I'd like to get us off of dead center on this thing and say, well, don't sit around saying, I wish I could do this. I wish I could do that. I wish I could do this. Wait a minute. Why aren't you if you really wish you could? The answer is very simple. You don't want to do the work. Let's be honest. Then let's find out what we do want to do the work for and get off dead center and do something. Produce something along the way. I used to say that I couldn't write. I said, I'm no writer. I could speak, I can give a sermon, I can stand up and preach, but I can't write. The funny thing about that was, I didn't know whether I could write or not, because I really never had much experience at writing. I figured out one day that by the time I came to Ambassador College as a freshman, I had already given well over 200 speeches in my short career as a speaker. This was at age 224. Because I started taking speech in high school. I was a member of a debate club in college, and every time you go to a debate, you get four speeches in every single debate that you give. And, of course, you go through several layers of debate in each contest that you're involved in. So I gave speeches on top of speeches on top of speeches. Some of those early speeches just really weren't very good. Now, I think I can think back and think, oh, that wasn't all that bad to start with. But my memory is very convenient. I have no question I did a lot of bad work back in those early days. Now, I come up to this time today, and standing before you people here, it causes me no anxiety at all, because I know we're all friends and we get along together. And also, I have got experience going back now to age 15, I guess, as a speaker and performer in public in one way or another, so that it's not exactly something I don't know how to do. When I really began to be forced to start writing, boy, I had just written a handful of things in my entire life. And they had to be pretty heavily edited along the way because they really just weren't very good. You just don't know what you can do until you actually have to do it. Speaking, the reason I preferred speaking to writing is because speaking's easy and writing was work. Just as simple as that. But when it comes right down to it, when the time comes that you're frustrated, or you're afraid, or you're anxious, or you're worrying, no time like the present. Just pick up and begin doing something. Even if it's read a book. Reading is an excellent hobby in a lot of ways because without input into your mind, you can't get much in the way of output. I learned that when I was doing my master's thesis. I sat down and tried to write a master's thesis, and I didn't have anything to write about. And I would go read some stuff, and I'd write for a while, and after a while I'd dry up. And then I'd have to go back and we have to read some more and study some more, and I'd write some, and then I'd dry up again. You've got to put something in to get something out. But the question is, are you getting ready to put anything out? And some of you who really enjoy reading, have you ever thought of putting something out, doing some writing? Have you ever paid enough attention to the novels that you're reading to understand all the technique of characterization and story flow and plot? No, probably not. And it'd be very difficult for you on your own. But you can take classes in night school and college and local junior colleges on creative writing that can help you learn characterization and plot and the development of themes and short stories and novels. Why not? Who says you can't do it? Well, my English isn't very good. Well, all right, improve your English. It can be done. Human beings were made to grow, to create, to produce, to develop. And if you're not doing it, it might be an explanation as to why some of us are not as happy as we really would like to be. Jesus made an interesting statement. He said, "Herein is my Father glorified, if you are highly productive." That says bear much fruit in the King James Version, but it means if you're highly productive. You actually glorify God by the things that you are able to produce and to create as a human being because that was what you were made for. Why do you suppose it is that we let our wooden legs, that some of us have, cancel out so much of the good in our life? You know, it may be anxiety, it may be resentment, it may be bitterness, it may be a blood feud, it may be a campaign of vengeance. Why do we let that cancel out all the good things in our life? You know, fear and anger and bitterness, they can take away your appetite. But you know, prime rib still tastes awfully good. Why let something take away your ability to enjoy prime rib and the taste of Chateauneuf du Pape right along with it on your palate, a beautiful red French wine? Why do we let people or things or ourselves or our wooden legs take that sort of thing away from us? It's not a big thing. It's a simple little pleasure of life. Why do we let things take good away from our lives? Honey, just as sweet, even though somebody has done us dirty along the way. The smell of the pine woods early in the morning is just as good. The flesh of those you love is just as warm. Laughter coming right from the belly, oh, it still feels so good. The song of birds is just as pleasant and relaxing, and the sunset just as beautiful. Why do you reckon we give all that up for a wooden leg? Because a lot of times we do. We just give it up all for a wooden leg. You know, anger that other people can eat you up. And anger can be used as a wooden leg as well. Blood feuds consume the lives of entire families for generations. Vengefulness can consume your life, can't it? You realize that when you forgive somebody, you really don't give them anything. You actually give yourself back your own life. Because the failure to forgive, the bearing of a grudge, the bitterness and the hatred that you have for somebody else is taking away so much of the good out of your life. And you know that when you forgive, it gives you back something you have been giving up for a whole long period of time. Now, if it is so simple, why is it so hard to forgive? When it's so good for us, why is it so difficult? I don't know. But it's possible that our wooden leg, whatever it happens to be, has given our life meaning for so long that we really can't quite imagine our life without it. We're just not quite sure what life would be without it. We have fought this person, or we have hated this person, or we have wanted revenge against this person for so long, or we've been afraid of this person for so long that we just really don't know how or what would happen to us if we would get turned away from it. If we gave up our fear and our anger and our bitterness we'd also lose our excuse for not producing something, for not creating, for not doing something. I have noticed a peculiar thing along the way in this thing. People who have real wooden legs are much more productive than people who play the game of wooden legs, like you and me. You notice that? Now, by wooden leg, I don't necessarily mean an artificial leg. I mean people with very real and often severe handicaps are often far happier and more productive people than a lot of us who are healthy, whole, all in one piece, got our children around us, got our, here's our life, and there's all kinds. These people, they get up in the morning and they go to work and they actually do things. There's a couple that I met at the feast a couple of years ago. I had him again last year, and I enjoy talking with him so much, up in Lansing, Michigan. He was injured in an accident some years back and is crippled from the waist down and has to be in a wheelchair all the time. She had polio many, many years ago, which has left her so devastated that not only is she in a wheelchair, but she doesn't have the power in her upper body that he has, that he can wheel himself around. She has to have those little electric motors, and her arms are so debilitated by the disease that they have to be supported by a complex little arrangement of levers here that she can rest her arms on, and she has enough strength to move them around, just not to support them. Now, many of you may have met them over at the feast at Lake Guntersville State Park, and they are tremendously inspiring people to be. Both of them have jobs. Now, here they are, in a situation where they could be just wards of the state to have the state take care of them all the way, but they both have productive jobs. They're both very active in the handicapper movement, and they prefer to call it the handicapper rather than the handicapped because of the handicapper is more of a bold or assertive word than handicapped, which is, well, here I am, I'm handicapped, this is my wooden leg. What can you expect? Of a person who is handicapped? They do not take that approach. All they ask of society is that we put some ramps and some things where they can, and wide doors in the bathroom so they can actually live like we do and where we do and have a normal life. They would call it a normal life. Because we don't think about it, because we haven't got have not lived with their handicap, we don't realize the difficulty that they often face from very well-meaning people who just don't put things or fix things or make them so that people who are in wheelchairs can actually get access to them. But I was so struck by the fact that, how easy it is. Some of us get a little bit like hypochondriacs from time to time, when we get ill or sick and we wonder, well, what's that? And we get a lump under the skin on our leg somewhere, and we say, well, maybe we better get the doctor to check that out, and we sweat bullets over it until we find out, well, no, it's nothing to worry about. So I think of us, and I think of them. And here she was. She still has to sleep every night in one of these breathing apparatuses that helps her breathe, because when she goes to sleep, the normal motor responses for breathing will tend to slow down. And of course, all the time she has an oxygen tank on the back of her little wheelchair with oxygen, right under her nose, so she's got that help at all times too, because of the difficulty she has in breathing. The doctor advised her not to come to the feast because she would have to be away from that breathing apparatus at night. But she decided, no, I'm going to go. She and her husband got in their van. They have a van with one of the lifts on the side of it, and they're very cheerful about the whole thing. They loaded up in their little van. They came down to the feast. They take care of themselves. They take care of one another. They ask very little of the rest of us at all. And they are just a tremendous example, I feel, of strong, courageous, productive people who are determined to enjoy life, determined to have love, to have creative work. By the way, they got married in that condition that they are now in. And they are able to enjoy life and love and one another and other people. Their honeymoon, they told us the story of their honeymoon. I think with all of their problems that they have, went all over this country of ours. Went everywhere that there is to go, just about. That you and I would say, boy, I'd like to go there someday. They've already been there. Boy, one of these days I want to go see this place. They've already been there. They got up and went. And they're in wheelchairs. And she, as I said, can't even lift her arms. She has to have these little things to support them. And has to have a power-driven wheelchair. Both of them fight for the right to work in spite of their handicap. And to me, that's a tremendous inspiration. I must confess I don't fully understand all that they feel. I couldn't possibly understand it. But I think a lot of what you and I are afraid of, when fear dominates our life, we're afraid of losing something. And I suspect that handicappers have already lost a lot, and they have survived it, and they found that life is good. And I think it makes a difference in that situation to realize I can lose a lot. I can lose nearly everything. And yet I'm alive, and life is good, and I can work, and blast it, I am going to work. And what an inspiration. They see no point in giving up more than they have already lost through self-pity or fear or resentment or bitterness, because you see, that's what you do. You and I, oftentimes I think, give up more in our lives than they have lost. And we don't have a wooden leg, not a real one. All we've got is some sort of wooden leg in our mind. I suspect that some of us from time to time must be tragic figures in the eyes of people who really do have a wooden leg. Must be tragic figures. For here they are, productive and happy. And here we are, whole and unproductive and unhappy. Something's wrong somewhere. Something is wrong somewhere, and it is not with them. Not with the handicapper, not with the productive person. It's with those of us who are allowing our wooden legs to be an excuse for not producing, for not going somewhere. I think in playing wooden leg, we often lose far more of value than the man who really has one. I want you to make it a goal in your life. Just think about this. Make it a goal. Write it on your wall if you have to. That when your wooden leg starts acting up, whatever it is, whenever you find yourself immobilized through fear, or grief, or resentment, or bitterness, or any other time you catch yourself using your excuse, just turn away from your wooden leg and go out to the garage, or go to your study, go somewhere, go to your studio, or go to work. Create something. It could change your life.